Marina will direct the games, and I will
The games.
all right with the touch.
Thank you so much.
Introduce everyone.
Thank you so much, Veronika. While I'm introducing everyone, maybe you could pull up, find my presentation, because I'll follow them with my presentation. So hello, everybody. Welcome to the panel on sports media, on women in sports media. My name is Marina Dmukhovskaya. I teach here at CU Boulder. I'm a professor here for CMCI. Let me introduce Carmann Snyder. Cami is a former basketball player here for CU Boulder, former buff. Also has had a great career in the sports media. We have Ekaterina Kuznetsova here, who is working for the Olympics, for the Olympic Channel for the past 6 years. And to the right, I have Veronika Kaleta with us, who is an amazing skier with experience of performing at the Olympic Games in Beijing 2022. Veronika will also share her experience with sports media. All right, so let's get it started. Do we have our presentation?
Yes,
Perfect. We can go to the next slide.
Maybe we can run it like a
Yeah.
presentation, because then it's like you don't see other side.
Start while I fix it.
Yes, of course. So as I mentioned, my name is Marina Dmukhovskaya. So I have covered 4 Olympic Games so far. So Sochi 2014, Pyeongchang 2018, Tokyo 2020, and Beijing 2022. And I will never forget like my first experience at the Olympic Games in Sochi. Who here has been to Olympic Games? Come on, you were an athlete, you should be like. So being at the Olympics, it's an incredible experience. You know, when I walked into the media center for the first time, it's, you know, you hear all these languages. There could be a Japanese camera person and, you know, an American commentator, and all the journalists are just coming together. It's an amazing vibe, amazing atmosphere of the Olympics that it's very hard to describe. And so I was in Sochi, was my first Olympic Games. And I think it was the first time I ever thought of sports as like a gender thing, was when I approached a bathroom and I saw like this big long line. I was like, huh, that's weird, you know, and I see this long line in the bathroom. And I realized it's a line for men's bathroom. I was like, I've never seen that before in my whole life, right? Like you go to the bathroom, wherever you are, CU Boulder or, you know, shopping mall, you always see a line of women waiting to use a restroom. So that got me thinking, I'm like, I don't think that many men ate something exotic last night, right? I think the problem might be somewhere else. And, you know, if you do look around in the sports world, it is still a very male-dominated field. And, you know, as I continued my career in sports writing and I became a professor here, I really got into that topic of gender equality in sports. And this is what I'm writing my dissertation about right now. I'm doing research on women in sports media. So as you know, you're probably looking at this slide right now. You're like, oh my God, she's like an expert, you know, like looks so cool. Yeah, like gets to speak at this cool conference. Well, not really. Let's go to the next slide. So this is a story I published in 2016. It's one of my favorite stories I've done in sport journalism. It's a British biathlete, Scott Dixon. So biathlon is a sport when you ski and shoot. So Great Britain is not that good for funding their athlete. So what Scott did, he decided to look for funding opportunities, and he reached out to like 5 rich people in Great Britain, and he got a sponsorship to get to the games, but it was not really full scholarship. So I published a story about Scott and his creative ways of looking for funding. And then I suddenly get this email and I got super excited. You know, it's an email saying, hey, I read your story about Scott, like, perfect. I would like to sponsor Scott's Olympic dream. I know that the funding is not full. So just, if you could please connect me with Scott. And I was like, oh my God, finally, in sports media, you write many stories and they're not so meaningful. You're like, okay, this person won, this person lost, blah, blah, blah. And then I finally get that feeling like, man, I'm doing something impactful, right? Like he gets to go to Olympics. So connect the two. And I say, hey, Scott, this gentleman here wrote me an email and he wants to support your Olympic dream, right? And then I get an email back from the person, and the email is like, hey, I'm a woman CEO of one of the most successful companies in Great Britain. And, but that's cool. I got used to that. I have like a gender neutral name, so please don't worry. And I'm like, oh my God, right? I'm an expert in this topic. I like talk at panels about women's sports. And here I am getting an email from a person who is in the position of power, who's financially ready to support somebody. My first thought, oh, it's a man, right? So that just gave me an insight of how deeply those biases, it doesn't matter if you're doing a PhD on this topic or, those biases are very, very deep within us. So let's talk a little bit about, what leads to these biases. And of course, it's a lot of stuff that we see in the media, a lot of stuff that we see in the sports media. So this slide right here, it's two national newspapers talking about performances of women at Rio Olympics. The first one is Chicago Tribune saying wife of a Bears lineman wins a bronze medal today in Rio Olympics. The second one is Michael Phelps shares historic night with African American. No names. Success of women is talked about through their relationship to men, whether it's a husband, whether it's a teammate. And, it really seeing stuff like that really got me thinking, where does the problem lie, right? So as I was a writer myself, I was kind of trying to analyze the editorial process, right? When you're trying to come up with a story idea to the production and to post-production. And of course, the kind of sexism starts at the editorial process. So just to give you an example, so this title here below is a pitch from my colleague ahead of Beijing Olympics, who said, hey, let's run a story about this amazing athlete from Kazakhstan who's trying to be at her fourth Olympic Games. She is 49, and the title of the story was Kazakhstan's aging queen of the ring. All right, think about it for a second. Think about the last time you saw a title, Tom Brady, the aging king of American football. Probably never, right? So we can go to the next slide. Only 4% of sports media talks about women. And it's not really surprising when we really look at how many women sport journalists are out there. So only 12% of people who present to our sports news are women. So that doesn't really come to surprise. Now, as I was working on my chapter, I on the chapter of gender equality for my dissertation, I was really going deep into my research, and there is a cool project called Global Media Monitoring. So what those people are doing, they're analyzing, scanning 10,000 articles about all the topics in the media all around the world. And they're scanning those articles and they're analyzing how many of these articles are including women, how many of these articles are including people of color, how many of these articles are written by women. So the statistic that was really, really shocking to me, it was, so they analyzed professions, right? They put in a gender neutral word, like let's say a doctor, a lawyer, student, whatever. And then they analyzed, when we talk about those professions, what are the most professions that are masculine in the media and the most professions that are very feminine, right? So the profession that got 95% of mentions as she was a sex worker. All right, followed by a homemaker. And as I was going down the list, I was like, Jesus, right? I was like, where is sports? Where are sports people, you know? So here you can see the bottom of the table, and fourth to the last position is sports person, athlete, player, coach, referee. So when we talked about those people in the media, only 14% of them were women. All right. So you're looking at that, you're like, okay, well, it's not the bottom of the list. So what are the professions that are even worse? So you have less chance to be mentioned in the media only if you're a military person, a criminal, or a Catholic priest. Maybe we'll skip the next slide. So I'm still, working on my research, so I won't be presenting all the findings right now, but I just really want to think like, okay, we're really at a point when this is clearly a problem, but is there anything positive? Is there anything optimistic about it? And we can see there is a big demand. There is a huge demand for women's sport. There is a huge interest for women's sport. So 84% of sports fans, and it doesn't really matter if it's men or women, are interested in women's sports. So it's a very emerging market. There is a big interest. And I'd like to kind of end my introduction with the next slide. So this photo right here is a photo of Barcelona versus Madrid women's soccer teams. And for the first time in history of women's soccer, in March 2021, the stadium was completely sold out. So if you were in March in Barcelona and you were trying to get to the match, you would not be able to find the ticket. So looking at this picture, it makes me feel like, like we're sitting here, it's this conference, it's, women in sport. My only wish is that in 10, I don't know, 5, 50 years, whenever this moment comes, my only wish is that this topic will become irrelevant. We'll be talking about humans in sport, not the women in sports. Thank you. And I'd like to pass the, how do you call it when it's really baton, yes. To my colleague at the Olympics. We actually met in Beijing. So Ekaterina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Yeah, maybe you could just pull it up here so I see it closer. Yeah, turning like this is a bit uncomfortable. Yeah, perfect. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Veronika, for having me here. And thanks so much to my colleague and my friend Marina for basically, passing the torch to me and allowing me to be here. And this is, again, like we're talking women in sports, and this is one of the direct examples how I get this WhatsApp message like end of September, hey, would you like to come and participate at the Women in Sports conference? I'm like, well, I have the US visa, I might try to make it. And then it was kind of a whirlwind of decisions to make, getting things approved. But here I am, and still a bit surreal, still a little jet lagged, but very happy. And another example how women supporting each other can make things happen. And so the presentation, sure it is. Can you pull up the?
The same one.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, because we're running the same presentation, so
Start and
our
we'll re-get it.
common project. Right. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, my name is Ekaterina, but you can address me as Kat. I'm an Olympics and media producer. And I, like Marina, I covered Olympics in Sochi 2014. I also covered Youth Olympic Games, as well as Special Olympics. So I have been an enthusiast since 2014. And I've been also actively supporting women's rights, and that the subjects of human rights in general have always resonated with me strongly. Originally, I come from Russia, from a very like patriarchal country, like very male-dominated patriarchal country. And back in 2015, I was Girls 20 delegate. It's an organization that's fostering leadership roles for women, and that inspired me. As well as recently, well, before COVID happened, I was part of another women conference called Fem in East, where there were women from different Soviet countries. So I was always like very happy and enthusiastic to jump on board when it was about women and helping and facilitating and inspiring women, you know, around the globe to not to be afraid and to do things that matter to them and that are meaningful. And before that, I was working in human rights. I was part of European Youth Press. I was a board member of organization, which gave me like a good rundown to what it's like to be female among often male-dominated world. You know, I was also so lucky to interview some of the most amazing athletes from the world of sports, some of the Olympic champions, and just like people with amazing stories that everyone can connect to. So yeah, this was a little bit of my background. I also lived, but when I was 15, as a young girl, I lived in the US. I was part of the Future Leaders Exchange program. And I think just having that opportunity where I took part in a competition and coming to live in the US, being in Florida in a host family, like kind of turned my world upside down and showed me that, you know, women can do anything. And here on the, go back, please. Here in this photo, this is my recent experience being in Eugene, in Oregon, interviewing Shelley Ann Fraser-Price, one of the most, you know, amazing role models in athletics. And it was really, really amazing. And I think going through these opportunities, I never took them for granted because I realized that at some point, I felt like it was lots of work. I also got lucky in some moments, but, you know, just having this role as a woman in sports is very, very exclusive and is a very amazing opportunity that not everybody gets to do. And I think my mindset already also changed because I saw these women, including Shelley and Fraser-Price, doing what they do. And I was like, if they can do that, I can also give it a try. Like there are basically no limits. So the next slide I want to show you is one of the series that I worked as part of the Olympics team as a social media producer. It's called Her Game. And when I was assigned to this by my boss, who's also a female, I was like, yay, just like jumping around the room, being really happy because this is the kind of projects I really wanted to work on. And if we can play the trailer, that would be really cool, because I think just to give it a little of flavor what the series are about and just to show you guys what it was like. It might take a second. But basically, it's the series that feature 6 different women from different sports, from different backgrounds. And as part of social media team, being part of the project, I also got to cast these women. So we were looking at very different languages, backgrounds, and just to have this kind of limitless opportunity to really cast anyone you want, not just from a certain country, a certain language group. That was really fun and really amazing. And yeah, I don't know if it's going to play. Here is Channa, who's actually from the US. I think at the time of filming, she was only 11 or 12 years old. So we also got different ages. Oh, yeah. Will it have sound with music? Music is really fun. It's like very dynamic. Don't know how to make it. But this is like someone from Channa who's like, you know, 11, being a total badass young woman. Oh, this is the episode, not the trailer.
Yeah, no, I can find the trailer.
The trailer, yeah. So these are like, okay, maybe we can just, you know, show different profiles and different outfits. You have Channa from the US, Alona, who represents Germany, but originally from Ukraine, Ishita from India, Thima from Trinidad and Tobago, Dana from Venezuela, and Silvia from Slovakia. So I'm very proud, you know, that we got this different cast of women not limited, neither by countries, neither by ages. It's just very diverse, and that was the goal. And that's what I'm kind of striving being at the Olympics, where we have people with, I don't know, from so many different countries. If you come to our offices, we're based in Madrid and Spain. You get like, of course, you get lots of Spanish speakers, but on top of that, you really get like, I don't know, you need an article in Hebrew, and there's always someone you can pull and say, can you help me translating that? And I think that's amazing. Like you can never take it for granted, any language. And all those people also come from companies like BBC, Discovery, and it's really a privilege to be working with them. And moving on to the next slide, connected to her game series that we just talked about. So this woman, she's called Alona Savchenko. Originally, she comes from Ukraine, but she changed her citizenship to Germany. She was the person who I really wanted to cast for her game, even though originally the brief said we only need 6 young girls who are like promising stars in sport. And I kind of questioned this editorial idea. I said, okay, but why do we exclude women who are moms, women who, you know, have been to 5 Olympic Games? And she only became Olympic champion in Pyeongchang 2018 Games at the age of 34. And when I watched it, I cried. It was too emotional to like imagine someone's dream, someone's journey, regardless of her age, regardless of what people said. And trust me, I read comments. People were like, oh, she's tall, she's never gonna make it. It's figure skating, you have to be young and thin. And here we have Alona Savchenko, who just, you know, proved them wrong and went there and did it. And in the middle of changing her citizenship, which I don't think is an easy thing to happen for anyone. So I met Alona on the shoot and we did podcasts together, and she was like the most down-to-earth person you can ever imagine. And we were like driving in her car, laughing and playing music. She drove me to my hotel. Like, this is the kind of champ you want to meet. And this is like the most inspiring, one of the most inspiring women that I met. And speaking of inspiring women, this is another inspiring woman that I met. She's called Oksana Chusovitina. She comes from Uzbekistan. The same kind of vibe, super down-to-earth person. And here in the photo, she's an artistic gymnast in green leotard. And she has been to 8 Olympic Games, and she still says we might see her at Paris 2024. Speaking of, you know, limits and what we think is possible and what we think is not. And every time she says, I'm going to retire, and then she comes back like new and like nothing happened. So speaking to people like that really proves to you that, you know, nothing is impossible. And moving on to the next thing. So speaking a little bit about like institutional changes, this article just came out on the 30th of September 2022. And there would be equal number of men and women appointed by President Bach for positions in IOC commissions, which I also think is a very important change. And I'm not going to lie, I joined Olympic Channel back in 2016, and I came in as an editor before I was the producer. And even as an editor, I was like the only girl working there. And then another girl came and I was like, yay, now we're gonna edit, now we're gonna show them, you know? So this kind of excitement, pure excitement that I was feeling, I'm still feeling it being part of the newsroom. Like Marina gave a great example of, you know, male versus female bathroom. But I very much like this idea that instead of like fighting against, it's good to fight for something. And instead of creating this narrative where we're trying to see people as enemies and not having opportunities, we got to celebrate what we have, and we got to celebrate the change that is happening. And you know, people who came here today, thank you for coming, because we are part of the change. It's all about raising awareness. Sometimes, as cheesy as it sounds, you know, it's cool that there are guys here in the audience as well as women. And I'm very grateful that you came, and we are part of this whole discussion. And then the next one, yeah, so speaking of my own experience now, comparing it to 2016, you know, a lot has changed. My current bosses are like my direct supervisors, and bigger bosses that I speak to, they're women, which is really amazing. And some of the experience that I had within the organization, for example, include for the 8th of March, we had this initiative where we had like this newsletter where one woman for the whole month of March could nominate another woman. And I got nominated by my boss, and then I could kind of pass the torch to another woman. And those are like small things, but they make your day. They don't cost a thing, you know, you just get nominated by someone, then you have to answer questions: which women inspire you, who is your role model, what can be done, what can be changed. And I think this is what organizations can try to foster, and not necessarily just during 8th of March or during Women's Month. I think it should be Women's Year, Women's Decade. I think it's been a long time coming, and we deserve it. And it would be really cool if something like this happens. And, you know, experiencing what I did in my organization, I was very uplifted, and it was, yeah, very promising. And like, finally, as a journalist, as a producer, I just want to say that storytelling is still, for me, is like the heart, is the key. Like this emotional connections when we can build with people that we talk to. Every time I speak to the athlete, I never take their time for granted, and I'm always like, you know, like not starstruck, but more like, wow, like this person that I've been reading so much, researching for so long, I finally get to professionally connect with. And here on this slide, you can see one of my latest interview done with Ukrainian athlete Yaroslava Mahuchik. I traveled to Eugene to get this interview done. And just like a reminder, it was after the war started back in February, and it was a very touchy topic. And when you ask yourself, how can change happen? You know, you can just do your job, and that's already making a really important big impact. Like Yaroslava said herself, I thought about why I should go to the World Championships and how I would jump. Then I understood that this is my work field, this is my sector. I have to defend my country in the field. And at this point, I realized that people doing their job for their country is all, like, it's all that matters. So connecting to that person with whom politically, you know, I'm not going to go into politics, but it wasn't easy. But for me, asking myself, okay, what can I do as a professional? What can I do as a human being? And I just kept pitching, you know, stories with Ukrainian athletes, like they need platform, they need to be heard. And when I got to speak to this person, and when she told me, okay, you can ask me questions in Russian, and I will respond in Ukrainian, I was like, of course, 100%. I'm very proud of the story, and that just shows that, you know, we might not have all the power in the world, but it's not what I think what we're seeking is such meaningful connection with someone who has been a refugee, who traveled all over the world and still won the competition and still did her job in an excellent way, regardless of the gender, regardless of any limits. So thank you very much, and let's keep doing it. Let's keep being strong and paving the way for women in sports. Thank you. And the last slide was just to
Let's connect.
yeah,
Yes,
let's
yes.
connect.
Yeah, circulate that.
Always about networking. Yeah,
Mhm.
thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Ekaterina, for your perspective. Now, it seems like a little bit of an Olympic club here to sort of to sort of put other fields in perspective. Kemi, the floor is yours.
Oh, sure,
Welcome.
absolutely. I do not have a fancy presentation. It's not comprehensive.
We came over prepared. so-
Yeah, right, exactly. No, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for being here, everybody. It's a pleasure. Media is my passion. That's what I started doing. I'm no longer in that world. I just actually stepped away. I'm now working at CU in development. But my path, when I first started at CU as a basketball player, and then I went into sports broadcasting, was on the local side. Did the Salt Lake Olympics, and agreed, it is like a very dynamic.
Oh my God, I didn't
yeah,
realize you
when
were in
you're-
the Olympics as well.
Oh, just, yeah, covered the Olympics, but it is such a dynamic, environment when you're covering the Olympics. It is pretty cool. It's pretty neat. But yeah, so I was always on the local side. So that was kind of my path when I first got into sports broadcasting. Now I just do select games, mainly for women's basketball, on game day stuff. But as for 20+ years, I did the local grind. So started off in a tiny little town in Nebraska doing it. Went to Nashville, went to Raleigh, came back here in Denver and worked at the Fox and the ABC here in Denver for many years. And then just recently made the switch over, kind of a career pivot over to advancement and development here at CU. And it's kind of it's definitely all related in that I think media it's so dynamic, it is so invigorating. It's also a lot of work and a lot of hours. And so for my family, it became like, okay, are we going to the next city? Are we going to the next gig? And it really became a place for me to switch career paths and come back to CU and kind of become a boomerang, which has been really nice. But I will say my time in sports broadcasting was phenomenal. And I miss so much of it because it is dynamic. It's something different every day. And it's the storytelling that is often, I think, the most impactful and most powerful. And I think the platform with which you have as a journalist in any capacity in terms of if you're producing, if you're that editor, there's so much that needs to be intentional about doing your job that can impact that storytelling so beautifully. That is really, it's a collaborative effort, which is what was always kind of my drive. That was always the piece that I loved about it. That's the piece that I miss most about it. My role now is pretty independent, and we kind of all do our own hustle. I miss that collaborative piece of media and sports broadcasting for sure. But I will say, during my time, it was always so interesting because even as I came up, and there was still a lot of women on TV when I was growing up. It was Robin Roberts. That's who I wanted to be. Robin Roberts was my gal. On SportsCenter, she was one of the first women, her and Linda on SportsCenter. That was my gig. That's who I wanted to be. And even in my time as kind of a Gen Xer coming up, there were still very few women. It was still very much male dominated, as it still continues to be. But it was interesting to me is it was always some of the side conversations, behind the scenes conversations. While I think coverage and voices and storytelling and platforming, all that is growing, and we're seeing some progress there. What was always interesting to me is the behind the scenes things. The athlete in the locker room who would drop his towel to try to get a reaction, those kinds of things. The producer who was like, I can't have you stand on this set because you'll be taller than the guy. I was like, well, why is that? Why do we care about that? All these kind of behind the scenes gender pieces that are still such a piece of the fabric and culture, especially in local news for sure. I'll never forget that conversation though about standing next to the anchor. From a producer, I did have one producer who said, do we care? And do we care that the girl is taller? And the one technical producer said, well, yeah, that just wouldn't look right. And I was like, oh my God, this was a peer. This was someone of, we were of the same age. We had shared a lot of the same experiences. Like, oh my gosh, we're still doing this. Okay, we're still having these conversations, which was always so interesting in local news because it's, that lens is still so traditional in some ways. So those experiences are, right. It speaks to like the growth we still have, the areas that we still need to advance. Even putting the stories, where the stories go in a rundown, right? Well, we got to have that NFL story higher. There's a capitalism piece to that, right? Here's the biggest audience, but it's also then the responsibility and the integrity and the ethics of where we place that story. Which I think anyone in broadcasting at any level has had many of those conversations about where something needs to be placed and why. So some of those experiences have been so formative, and they're also so, while they're so frustrating, they're also they fuel so much energy and desire to, okay, keep this conversation moving. And ironically, that's kind of what led me to my path now. As a total side note, in development is making sure everyone has the support that they really need. As an athlete, I feel like I had so much support here at CU, and now my role in advancement and development, it's really raising money to make sure that equity is across the board, making sure everyone has that kind of support, regardless of what kind of student they are and where they're coming from. So that's been kind of neat to kind of transition that. But one of my other favorite stories, I mentioned it, just in terms of that gender piece and And when you're sitting in that role and broadcast, the NFL locker room, which is such a weird place because no other office in any other organization do you go to somebody's dressing room where they're getting changed out of clothes and you interview them. It's such a weird space to begin with, but the young athletes who were still on their own, you know, they're in their own lane, they're doing their own thing. They've had different experiences where how they've come up and how they've grown up. But the total spectrum of knowledge and awareness and the lens of having females in their locker room, which was always so interesting to me. But the young athlete who had his leg up on the stool and dropped his towel, and it was a group of media, and it was another gal and I that were asking some of the questions, and there's some other media around, but it was clearly this power play of here's a little thing I can throw down, like, okay, we're not going to do that though. And that constant challenge of like, how do you handle it? How do you react? What are you doing? And the lens is so much focused. It wasn't so much, right? The male colleagues, it was all eyes on how are these two ladies how are they gonna react? Well, we're gonna be professionals and keep doing our jobs. That's what we're gonna do. So those kinds of things are still happen, right? They're still there, kind of that optimism, like there's still so much progress, but there's still a lot of room, a lot of work. But yeah, so that's my kind of sports media career in a little bit of a nutshell. One of my best stories, again, I always talk about, it was all the things behind the scenes, was on my way to cover Super Bowl, and we're on the plane, so it's full of a lot of fans. This is the Broncos Super Bowl, and there was a gentleman who I can assume maybe had a couple cocktails before the flight, but he got into this conversation with me about women in sports, and it quickly was turning very cringy. But his whole idea was really the only reason women are in a position is because, especially on TV, they're only there to look good, which was just hitting every trigger for me. And I was surrounded by a lot of great colleagues because we're all on the same flight going out to the Super Bowl. And he just could not let this go. And like I said, this was somebody you're like, I hope you've had cocktails, because I hope this is not a sober conversation you're having with me about the legitimacy of where women are placed. And they're only there because they look good. And that's the only reason any one of them gets hired. Again, that was the other one that always stood out to me. Is like, oh gosh, again, and this was within the last 10 years. This is the conversation we're having. Okay, all right, very good. Because again, that goes down the whole rabbit hole of gender and women and kind of that sexualized side of it, which is right, a whole different lane that could be a whole other conference. But it's right, how we view athletes, how we cover the athletes, how we portray them, and especially even with women in sports broadcasting as well. So but that's my journey in a little nutshell. So I'm happy to, yeah, as we move forward to any questions and comments, but I really appreciate you guys all being here, and I thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, I guess it's, it's those stories or those little details that happen behind the scenes that really make your experience day by day that are important at the end of the day. So thank you for sharing those. And let's also get an athlete perspective. So we have here Veronika Kaleta with us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Veronika. I'm not prepared as well. I'm just gonna go through my experience as an international student, as a woman. And I would say at first, thank you very much for having me here. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for coming.
Like you said, Siri is giving us a lot of support. I totally agree with it. I feel so safe here. I would say having a female coach here is awesome. I can compare having a female coach in Poland, and that was the worst experience in my life, and having the best female coach here, the best experience in my life, because she's international as well. She's not from America. She's supporting and she's trying to keep all team together, even though like you're a woman or you're a man, doesn't matter. You're the same.
boys are complaining so much sometimes. So, and she's always like, oh, guys, don't be a I'm not gonna finish it. So yeah, that's awesome. And about the media experience from my life, I don't have really good media experience from the like Europe side. I was on the national team for like 4 years. They kicked me out this year because of America. But I was in the Olympics. That was like the best, let's say the best experience in my life. That was something what I was dream about. Last season, challenging season because of COVID, you know, all of the stuff around, but I really appreciate that I could go there, I could experience everything. From the media perspective, from Poland, I'm always saying I hated, like, I was always scared about some interview. I didn't like it. I was always like, oh no, again, like after race, like emotion, they're like so high. Sometimes you're just gonna say something and it's like turned different way, and they're like taking advantage of it. They're like putting it on the title, and they're like, okay, that's the main topic, you know, that's the something that we're gonna sell, and it's gonna get a lot of followers. It's gonna get a lot of like views. That's the most important. But then my mom is reading it, watching it, and she's like, oh, what happened? I'm like, oh, did I say that? I don't remember it, you know. So I was always struggling with like interview after my race, you know, as a Nordic skier. It's tough. You're exhausted. You're like, you're dying. You want to just change, go cool down, go to your room, eat something and sleep. And you're standing there sometimes for 20 minutes, you're frozen, and you have to give this interview because, you know, these people, they came here. I mean, that's, you know, that's the job. Like my job is skiing. These people, they have to do it. So you had to stop, you had to talk. Sometimes 5 interviews, and you're like, do I have to say it again? You know, that was like the worst. And you're like, I don't really want to go through the same questions. I don't like it. And always first question from my Polish national team experiences, I would say always was like, what happened? What was wrong? Like, why are you not asking like, are you happy about your race, or like go more through like, oh, how was it? How did you feel? It's not. It's always like, what happened? What happened? What was wrong? You know, always like negatives, all of the negatives. And then like, I said, for example, like, okay, so like finish was wrong. Title, she knows that she has to work more with like finish, like last few meters she gave up there. And I'm like, I didn't say that I gave up. I said that was the, you know, the worst part of the race. And yeah, that was the worst experience for me. That's why you invited me for your class, like talking with students about my experience with sport, like my story. I was scared about it because I was always scared that they're just gonna give me like some not really nice questions, you know. But it was awesome to join your class and talk with these people. But when I came here to America, I had my first experience with like media here, and they were like, oh yeah, we just want to show you, like, show yourself, like show the positives. I'm like, wow, that's awesome, you know. They're like, oh, how was your race? Like good job, guys. It was always like positive. I had never heard anything negative from like media here, you know, from like the people like from America. So I was like, oh, sometimes like someone actually is trying show myself like positives, like show some positives, you know. And I was like, well, that's like a different view. And when I came back to Europe, like, because last 2 years for me, I was still in on the national team. I tried to connect the CEO, ski team, and national team. That's quite impossible. But I tried. So I was average. You can't be good if you're flying all the time. So I came back and they're like, you have a lot of positive energy. And I'm like, I was like, you change, and I saw like girls from my team going like doing training, head down, oh no, another training. I was like, let's go, let's see, you know. I was like, I don't know, I had like such a positive energy. This team gave me a lot. And being with boys, it's nice. Being with a team where like where we have like boys and girls, it's so nice, because for like the last 4 years for me, I was only with team when we had 10 girls, a lot of drama all the time. I didn't enjoy it that much like here. So they're like, oh my God, you have a lot of energy, we need you. And my team told me, we need you. And I was like, I'm not gonna like get some mental problem because of this team. I'm not gonna, I mean, I wish that I could help you. I'm trying, but I think the training here and training in Poland, it's different. So they're like, training here is more like a fun. You need fun to like go through all of this really tough stuff, you know. And in Poland, I was always like training, nothing else. Here university, like with people around, you know, having some fun. So having like these two perspectives, it's awesome. And I changed a lot because of being here. I really appreciate that I got offer from CEO. And yeah, and media perspective, like even though like last 2 months for us, because we're preparing for the ski ball this next week. Are you going? No. Expensive. So yeah, we had a lot of like media stuff, like showing ourselves, like having really good pictures, like interviews. That's awesome. And just follow Siuski team on Instagram. I can recommend it. It's a lot of this good stuff there. So yeah, thank you very much that I could share my experience, and hopefully you will enjoy it.
Thank you so much. And follow Veronika on Instagram as well. Really cool Instagram insights about student training. All right, well,
And a quick reminder to viewers from home or from work that they can actually ask questions as well.
all right, well, thank you for sharing your perspective. I think it's time to open up the floor for questions or for comments. Don't be shy, feel free to ask us a question.
Yep, Mika.
Ask the question. Well, I just want to also attest to Veronika's statement about the energy here. I agree, like, it's hard to be in a girls' team at a high level when it's always just training, and you're kind of pitting against each other in a way to compete and fight for spots and stuff, and that's kind of draining sometimes. But I would say, yeah, the dynamic here, I don't know if it's just CU, but it's just like, I did feel it as well, like my energy shifted. And yeah, like also all my experiences with media at CU, like I felt like I was a superstar or something. It's like no one's ever really like given me this much attention before. But I agree, like the college system, especially at CU, has been really great. And I loved hearing your perspective on it. Obviously coming from Poland, it's a little different than Canada, but I still feel the same way.
Yeah, I think competing for CU as a team, you know, that's the difference, because being a part of the national team is like you're a part of the national team, but you're trying to focus and you're trying to just give your best result. You're not like trying to help girls around you. You're competing against each other, like you said. And yeah, it's like I just realized that my team, they try to focus with competing against each other, like not competing against the world, you know.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. So when one girl had like good result because she was like she had better result than another girl, she was like, yeah, I'm happy. If not, she was crying. I'm like, are you competing against this girl, or are you competing against like world, and you're still 60 in the world and you're happy about it because your friend is 61, you know?
Yeah.
That's the difference. And here it's more like, let's do it as a team. And even though I'm like the worst on the team, like my worst day or whatever, I'm happy that we count and we just got some points for TU, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree.
But that actually also relates to life as well. You know, we're talking about competition and this whole concept of like competitiveness, because the world is a competitive place, right? Not just sports, but anything around us, like the job market. And how do you go about finding that line when you are competing, you are competitive, but you're also supportive, right? That's something that I think about a lot.
That's a very good point, because I think, speaking of media, I found so interesting what you said. And I mean, I've seen it myself behind the scenes, that unfortunately that's what happens. And the most tragic part for me is that, like, you also see people who know very little about the subject just coming from a certain media, and they just start focusing on the most juicy part of the story. Let's say something happened to the athlete like 5 years ago, and I think it's all about the context, and it's all about, like, how would you feel if someone asked you that question, if someone just focused on like your downfall and how things went down. And it just feels like unprofessional and tactless to me, because if you can ask things, ask them. Sometimes there are hard questions, they have to be asked, but it's about how you ask, it's about context, it's about first showing like you know your stuff, you did everything you could in terms of learning. And then if you have to ask, you ask, but you also like have to understand it's a very vulnerable spot the athlete is in. And this person just did like crazy thing you can probably never do. That's what I tell myself when I'm standing there in the mix zone and just asking what went wrong. It feels like unethical to me. But Marina, as to your point about the rivalries, I think so often I see how especially women are being like pushed against each other by the media, and often there is no even, can you say, no buff, like there is no juice to it, there is nothing to create from there, but they just keep like nailing on it, keep saying no. As women, I don't know, women fighting over men, like this narrative is old, nobody wants to see that anymore, like just leave us alone. Give us like, you know, like there is this test in the cinema where you have to check every film, and I forgot the name of it, but you have to watch the movie and see how much percentage of it women don't speak about men. And this is sad, and that's pathetic that so many films don't pass this test. And I think the world of sports is like the same. If a woman, I don't know, dates some athlete from the team, or if there is some, that's like one of the first questions to be asked. So like, how's your relationship? Did he support you? Like, no, I supported myself. I'm there to stand for myself and to be who I am. So I think like this rivalry stories, and those are often stories we click on. And that's what the problem is, because this whole competition, you know, if there is no demand, there is no supply. It's as simple as that. So the fact that we are the ones, and I'm guilty of that sometimes, you just see the headline and it's so clickbaity and like, oh yes, let's read about it. It's gossip, it's what gets clicks, but I'm also like sometimes reminding myself, no, I'm not gonna click on that. I know where they're going with that. Like, I'm gonna do my thinking before. And if it's even one click less, I'm just not giving it to them. So I think it's for us to also create that narrative where we say, this rivalry is old, it's outdated. There is more to focus on in life.
Yeah, and it's our responsibility as well as storytellers to, like, every story has to have a drama, right? Like, we do have to find those storytelling lines that are interesting, and it's our job. But, you know, going about it the way that is empathetic and the way that focuses on the athlete and their storylines, rather than, you know, putting the females against each other. But I'm curious, Kemi, you were an athlete yourself, and then you kind of got with both perspectives, right? So you were on the court, you were with a mic. How did it help you to have that athletic career in terms of asking the right questions?
Yeah, I don't know that I always got it right by any means. But I think, yeah, absolutely that lens of what, you know, the game, the results, the win or the loss, there's far more to it than that final score or that final box score, right? That the humanity behind the athlete, the perspective of which they're approaching life with. There's so much more to the story than just the end result. But the other nuance side of that, right, is especially on the professional level, they're a professional athlete, they're also being paid to perform. So those hard questions do become part of your job. This is the, right? So like, then it becomes, yeah, you do have to show up for some of those hard answers. And there's, then that whole spectrum of like, what story are you telling? Is it that, amateur story? Is it a professional level story? All of that is, kind of the ethical storytelling piece. But there's no question as an athlete, like it definitely helped me approach it with kind of less transactionally and definitely more with more humanity of knowing that there's so much more, the hours, the blood, sweat, tears that they put into this moment, right? So that definitely helped my lens for sure. But it's hard, especially when you're in a newsroom where people are saying, hey, I need something. We don't have viewers, we don't have readers. We're in the midst of a huge digital migration where we're, all those things. There's so much pressure from the business side of it too.
Yeah. And, at the end of the day, maybe even the agenda thing, maybe it's about being like having that empathy, standing in the freezing temperatures, in the cold and seeing a human show up, just having had that tough race and maybe asking a question to them.
And I think the other trap I think we fall into a lot, and not even just for, there's a lot of, I think, specific traps for female athletes, but even just for all athletes, is assuming that because they have performed or they haven't performed, that person wants to be suddenly the subject expert, right? Because we sometimes place these athletes on the pedestal, like, and now give me your opinion on this conflict overseas. When it's like, no, they just actually are here to perform. I think that's sometimes hard, that lens to keep in mind. And I think you see it more and more, but getting better. But I think that's the other thing, is also recognizing, okay, sometimes an athlete just wants to talk about the game. They sometimes just want to talk about the performance. We don't need their opinion on everything, right? But especially here, I feel like we love our sports. We love our sports heroes. We love our sports villains. So we like to get their take on everything. Sometimes that's not the right question either. Yeah.
And how do you draw the fine line? When I stopped skiing and stopped high school, I took a gap year. And I worked as a journalist for Neve Sport, which at the time was the leading ski magazine in Italy. But I stopped because I knew all the people personally, and I could share stories because I knew them personally, but I thought that was completely unethical. So I was completely blocked. So I decided that was not my profession, and I did something else. But how, especially as an athlete, everybody, how do you walk the thin line between the personal knowledge you have of the people and what you think it's fair to report?
Yeah, absolutely. That's where like the integrity comes in, and knowing how you got the information, when you got the information, what's relevant, what's not. And any journalistic endeavor, right, is all focused on the network and the relationships that you have. But then it's obviously comes down to like the very clear communication as well, right? What is on the record, what is off the record? And if you have a good relationship, right, as big as, and the stories get bigger and bigger, what's worth sharing and what's not? And that needs to be like an intentional, thoughtful conversation within every journalist, no matter what you're doing. I feel like, whether it's creating, which snapshot are we going to use, which headline are we going to use? That's all part of that conversation and that process for sure. But it's hard sometimes, especially if you have background knowledge, right? Well, like, okay, when did I get that knowledge? How does that? Yeah, absolutely. It's tough.
Totally agree with what you just said. I think it's about clear and transparent communication with the person that you are interviewing. But I have to say, we're humans. Can it sometimes get personal? Yes, absolutely it can. Nobody is a robot. When you meet certain people, when you spend 30 days working Beijing Olympics and you watch their stories, drawing the line can be hard. But I think, it's about just making sure you have that understanding. And what you do get from when it becomes sort of like a friendship with an athlete, you get a certain depth from that. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, because
it's not that, you know, you have my trust and I'm not gonna, like, if the story happens, I'm not gonna run. It's, you still have to, like I said earlier, you have to ask difficult questions, but having that sort of depth that the person sees that you show up after every press conference, at every competition, it gives them the idea that you care. And I did make some friends who are now retired athletes, and I think there is no shame about that. And one of them, we invited her to come, you know, to Madrid when the idea came around that, okay, we want to do podcast and we want to do it with a woman and we want to do it about body image. And what I'm going to say now is a bit like, you know, scary, controversial, but my colleague said, well, you know, this person, how about you guys do the naked podcast?
What?
Yes. And I said, like, what, how is that? Like, that was my initial reaction. And then we were discussing it. And the point was, we did it in the studio. We got it approved. It's published on the Olympics. You can listen to it. It was with the gymnast that, you know, I met her before, and we did a naked podcast, and we forgot that we are naked like 3 minutes in, because it was like, I was so listening to her story, and we were just talking like how she struggled with the body image, and it was like probably like the most badass move in my career that I did. I don't know, like, you know, telling you this, it's also vulnerable sometimes, but what happened also, everybody in the office was like buzzing about it, and I was a bit uncomfortable because people and that was kind of the goal of the whole thing. We knew that people just gonna focus on the naked part, and we were like, you know what, yes, we're gonna play with it, and we're just gonna say, like, as I'm talking to Marta Panini, is the athlete that I interviewed, she's a gymnast, bronze medalist from Olympic Games. I tell her, you know what, like, it's so comfortable suddenly, and I couldn't care less if you're closed, if you're not closed. And she was like, I feel the same. And that's the kind of the cool idea about the body image that we try to defy. We're like, we're gonna do it, and we're just gonna prove you wrong. And it's just bodies. What we forget, like, they're being sexualized all the time. And did I draw the line there clearly? I think I did, because it was for the purpose of showing the world that those are just bodies, and those are just athletes, and they do amazing stuff with their bodies that are worth focusing on, as opposed to focusing just on sexualizing that part.
Yeah.
So sorry, just like the story I didn't plan on telling, but I think it might be fun to listen to.
And buried the lead. That was a great story.
Just to build on
I'm not sure whether I have the guts, but.
And just to build on what you just said, I think a very difficult question you ask yourself as a sport journalist is like, you really want to have exposure, you really want to have the numbers, but at the same time, you really want to go into the deep storytelling. And here, the economy of capitalism is really, you know, driving me crazy sometimes. Like when I was working, I was covering Tokyo Olympics. We had this tracker, right, that tracks the numbers, like each article that you push out, how many people saw it, how many people shared it. And so I wrote this story about a boxer from Dagestan, like it's a Muslim region in Russia. And it was like a really, like, I think it was the best story I've ever read in my life. It was about her career struggles, you know, really deep storytelling. And I think around like 2,000 people saw the story. And I spent like maybe 3 or 4 hours like interviewing her, like trying to call Dagestan to talk to her mother, you know, all that sort of stuff. And then the second story that I published the following day was called The Best Memes of Olympic Games in Tokyo. And that story got like 50,000 views.
Right.
All right. So, and that kind of drives you crazy. And you don't really have any answer on how to battle that, you know, clickbaiting competition. And I guess at the end of the day, you know, I actually came to my boss in this project, and I complained to her, and something that she said really stands out to me. She's like, listen, but because of your meme story, because of those clicks, you're able to work on something else. You're able to produce something more meaningful. So I guess it's a constant struggle.
And how do you see athletes' self-promotion? I mean, it's interesting in skiing, for instance, there's some very lame athletes who really post about themselves like they were gold Olympic skiers, and some who should really push themselves who don't? You know, I wonder how you see it from the media perspective.
I think you don't have to be a gold Olympian to promote yourself, you know? I really admire people who just go out there, call themselves an expert, they make their own living economy, you know, I really admire that. And it's at the end of the day, I think it's really hard work. It's the time, it's the effort, it's really just, you know, just being out there, being open. Veronika, how many followers do you have?
I don't have a lot, like 1,700 maybe. I'm not taking that much care about my media, I would say, but that's something what is giving you money. That's something that you can get some money, go training, and you have, you know, your own money, so you don't have to ask your parents or you don't have to work. So for a student, being a student athlete, like for me, international student, I don't have to take care about money because university is paying for everything. But being a athlete and you know, you have no scholarship, you're trying to find a sponsor, you're trying to promote yourself. That's why you're using Instagram. Like, I think now it's the most like kind of on the top. I think that's a good thing. Some of the people I saw, like, I'm not gonna say the names, but some of the people, they're promoting, like, you know, themselves so much, even though they're so bad. They're really bad. And you have the athletes and you have the athletes that they're like on the top, like the best athletes, and they're like, okay, whatever, I'm not gonna like put that much energy on it. But I hope that these people, like a little bit lower, can just work a little bit more with media now and then go through training a little bit more so they can get better.
What I think is interesting though is that so many accounts that we see on social media, you don't even know if it's like a real person running, like the athlete themselves,
Or the
if it's
parent.
or could be the parent, but maybe parent is like a safe, well, not sure, yeah, how I feel about that, but like if it's a media agent or someone who is running an account for you, those posts, they feel plastic to you, you know, there is like no, it's like they're very promotional, there is not too much substance, you might still have a lot of followers, but it just doesn't feel like that, you don't feel those true emotions after you step off, you know, your competition rink or wherever you competed at. And yeah, I think it really truly doesn't matter if like you're good or bad. I think everyone deserves a space to be able to promote themselves. And I would actually argue whether, you know, the top athletes, for example, here in the US, you know, they get sponsorships and deals and media training and all of that. And then there are athletes that I've met who, for example, paving the way, they're the first athletes from, for example, an African country ever doing winter sports. And I'm like,
Let's
you know,
not enter in that field.
but you know what, like, I think it's so important. And meeting those people, I was like thinking, oh my God, how smart you have to be, because you're not only an athlete, you're also like a media manager. You run the whole show. It's crazy. Like, they're looking for opportunities for sponsors. They're like having full-time job while they're preparing for the competition, and like the amount of respect I gained for these bad athletes, like I can't even explain you. And like
I have
those
a
people are
completely
just
different perspective of that.
I wanted
Yeah.
to add to something that Ekaterina said. I think it can be really, really empowering, social media. I just wanted to bring up the experience of an athlete who was competing for Oregon. Unfortunately, I don't remember her name, who went to March Madness, and you know, through TikTok, she showed the differences that women and men basketball teams had at the March Madness, right? That one post on TikTok became national news, right? It really sparked the debate about women's sports. It really influenced the contracts of people at of women at WNBA. So that was really, really empowering. But then at the same time, there is like also this downside of social media. Like, you have some, you know, women cyclists just posting their weight and, you know, how much they weigh today, how much they weigh tomorrow, and like young girls like really following those accounts, you know, checking their body weight and, you know, trying to lose weight. So it can be really empowering and life-changing, and it can be really diminishing at the same time. And that's something that is shocking to me. Yeah.
Or
I interrupted.
I heard the story of the athlete who was, she's running her TikTok account and she was shamed by the coaches because she's doing that. Because they would say, you basically are a bad athlete because you're doing also your social media. And for me, that's like unacceptable. Like, you're still allowed to be a person. Like, you're still allowed to, you know, I'm Olympics producer, but I still have my YouTube channel. So what? Like, we get to be, that's what makes you interesting, not just being like one-dimensional, like robotic human being. You can just do a lot. But Federica, you were saying you had very different experience. It made me intrigued. What was that?
It's a long story, but
Okay.
they were, this winter, they were a group of 8 people who cheated their way into the Olympics with cheating on races, and that prevent in winter sports. And one of these was one of those who was really using social media to promote himself. And luckily FIS is on it. So the FIS council, there wasn't, so I actually was the beginning. I wrote an article, and after an article, I was approached by FIS and asked to make a report. I made a report that led to an ethics inquiry. The ethics inquiry determined that there were people who were paid to cheat and to allow people to lower points. And, you know, in skiing, literally people went from 600 points to 7, okay, which is impossible. Yeah, no,
It was
it's
egregious.
it was, so at the last council, this was said publicly in FIS, and there's gonna be now a committee that is gonna work on which sanctions for the people who took part in it, and hopefully also change qualification criteria for the Olympic Games. But this is also, it calls in a little bit the responsibility of journalists, because the reason why I uncovered it was that one of my athletes was invited to one of these races, and the person who organized the biggest scam had actually contacted me to come and race with us. And I look at this profile and I said, no, you're not material for us, right? So when my athlete came to me, there was something fishy anyway. I started digging, but the article I wrote was data. And then people started to approach me, and we're talking about people being threatened of life, kids being threatened of life because they were racing fast. It was this particular athlete impersonated the president of his own federation. No, it was over and beyond, right? And then I approached media, journalists, and said, look, this is the evidence that I have. Well, I approached the federation. The USSA fought nails and teeth to try to get their spot back. The Austrians and the German and the French got their spot back. They really put the Italians didn't manage. So some of these spots were recuperated, some were not. But some of the journalists were like, oh, they're really not interested. Like, look, this is the hard evidence. This is the hard evidence. You want to look into this. This is a major scamming. And unfortunately, it's easy to cheat in skiing in minor races. So basically what they did, for instance, in one of those races, is that the TD was stationed in a position where he could see most of the race, but he couldn't see the start, and they did slow starts. And in skiing, if you take a slow start, you're already 3 seconds off, right? And that's it. But so some media, eventually the New York Times brought about it, the Washington Post brought about it, but journalists were not willing to dig, right? And they did to a certain extent, but much less than they should have done. And so, it brings a little bit of the responsibility of the journalist to actually be willing to inquire, right? And to do the dirty work, and not just because one person is good at social media, actually, they don't want to go against it. plus all the journalists that called me because they wanted all I had.
Oh,
Wanted
yeah.
to pass to these people. It was a wild ride. But I have a question for MR. Do you look at the social media profile of the people you are interested in, or you don't? As a coach, selecting people.
I don't personally follow any of my current athletes,
Mhm.
but I do look at their social media. The whole game in NCAA is really changing with name, image, and likeness. And as coaches, we can get involved in that piece.
But when you
I
select
wouldn't
them,
say I formulate an opinion based on their social media. If that makes sense.
For example, I got offer from CU by Instagram. They
Really?
texted me on Instagram. My
Wow.
coach,
Make
yeah.
it known.
recruiting too.
And then she texted me.
Wow, that was like life
I mean,
changing.
our coach is I mean, they're checking first your result and then they're trying to contact with you. So they didn't have my email, like no more information. They found me on Instagram and sent me a message on Instagram. And then she sent me email. So this is how we we started.
Wow. So,
The game is definitely changing.
Yeah.
People are using social media a lot more.
right. I think we got to the end of it. Thank you very much. This was super interesting. Thank you for sticking us with us. Be ready for more in the future. And thank you, Marina and Ekaterina, for flying all the way in for this. And so much, thank you so much, Marina, for helping me, organize this.
You're very welcome.
And thank you for
Yes,
coming
thank
and
you.
sticking with us. And we will distribute the video. Probably cut the last part of the Instagram.